Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to welcome you to the Symposium Global Disconnections, Performing Arts Collections in the Time of a Pandemic, organized by the SIBMAS Association and the Theatre Institute in Warsaw. My name is Olga Sobkowicz, and I am very pleased and honored to be your host during this exceptional afternoon. Before we begin, I would like to ask the Program Director of the Theatre Institute, Mr. Jarosław Zimmerman, to officially open our symposium.
Thank you, Olga. I would like to welcome the Presidium and all SIBMAS members to the Zbigniew Raszewski Theatre Institute for an online meeting. At the same time, I would like to invite you to the SIBMAS conference, which will take place in the Theatre Institute in Warsaw next year in spring 2022. I would like to introduce again Olga Sobkowicz, who is not only the head of the organization department at the Theatre Institute, but she was also the originator and coordinator of the expert group working at the Theatre Institute during the pandemic. She will be your host today. And now I would like to declare the SIBMAS Symposium entitled Global Disconnections, Performing Arts Collection in the Time of a Pandemic officially open. Olga, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask Alan Jones, the acting president of the SIBMAS Association, to say a few words.
Thank you, Olga. On behalf of Nick in Munich and myself in Glasgow, I'd like to welcome you to this online event. It's wonderful to be here with you all today at this online symposium. It truly has been an extraordinary time since we last came together in Paris in 2018. It feels such a long time ago, partly because it was. The title of that meeting at the BNF was Being Successful Together: Participate, Share, Cooperate in Safeguarding Performing Arts Heritage. This was possibly a bit pathetic. I think in some ways the effects of the pandemic have highlighted the very themes, or at least emphasized the importance of working together wherever we are. The human, social, and economic costs of this pandemic have been huge. Perhaps the performing arts have been hardest hit by the pandemic, as I'm sure you will all know. There really was no rule book for understanding how the pandemic would play out for artists and for the performing art collections we look after. What it has highlighted is the fragility of what we all hold dear: being in a theatre to watch a live play, being around colleagues and friends. It is therefore rather appropriate that this short online event takes a look at the global disconnections that the pandemic has brought to our working lives, how we are collecting, how we now teach, how we save and promote the performing arts themselves. We have three very interesting keynote talks that will focus in on some of the pluses as well as the negatives that this world event has brought to us. Theatre, performance, and performing art collections crosses borders and brings us together, and we should always cherish that fact and never allow it to fade. I'd like to thank everyone in the wonderful Polish Theatre Institute, especially Lena and Jagwiga, for their work on this online event. This event is just a taster, as you've heard, for a real live in-person event in lovely sunny Warsaw in the spring next year. So if you're watching this and you're not a member of SIBMAS, do visit our website and join. Thank you all for being here and helping performing arts to once again reconnect across borders.
Thank you very much, Alan. Now we would like to present a short film about our institution, hoping that in the spring 2022 you will join us live in Warsaw for the full SIBMAS conference.
Zbigniew Raszewski Theatre Institute, established in 2013, is located in the center of Warsaw at 1 Jazdów Street and housed in the former 7th Pavilion of the Surgical Ward of Ujezdowski Hospital, built in 1905. The Theatre Institute focuses on the documentation of Polish theatrical life and works towards the advancement of theatrical culture. It supports public debate about Polish theater, extends research perspectives, and conducts educational activities. It also houses the only bookshop in Poland devoted entirely to theater. In addition, the Theatre Institute runs its own publishing house, maintains the largest website of knowledge surrounding contemporary Polish theater, and has created the online Encyclopedia of Polish Theater, a compendium of knowledge regarding the history of theater in Poland. The institution itself is named after Professor Zbigniew Raszewski, a theater scholar, practitioner, and one of the greatest academics in the recent history of Polish culture. The Barbara Krasnodemska Documentation Studio houses the largest theater archive in Poland. It makes accessible a vast collection of press articles, reviews, photographs, theater programs, playbills, posters, and documents relating to the operation of individual theaters from all over Poland. Our reading room offers free access to the Institute's library collection, which specializes in Polish and foreign language literature about theater and related arts, including dance, film, music, and circus arts. The Theatre Institute provides a flexible space holding meetings, discussions, conferences, workshops, educational activities, film screenings, performances, installations, exhibitions, and festivals, as well as gala events for competitions run by the institution and celebrations of importance to the theater community. Every year, around 150 various events take place in Jazdów. The Zbigniew Raszewski Theatre Institute.
It's the highest time we welcomed and introduced our keynote speakers. Maria Babicka, graduate of Sociology and Social Anthropology, theater pedagogue, PhD student and member of the Department of Culture Research Methods at the Institute of Applied Social Sciences of the University of Warsaw. She works in the Department of Theater Pedagogy at the Zbigniew Raszewski Theatre Institute. Ramona Radziewski is the former head of collections management of the recently dissolved Department of Theatre and Performance at the Victoria and Albert Museum, London. She completed her Bachelor of Arts in Music at Trinity College Dublin, followed by her professional qualifications as the archivist and records manager at University College Dublin. And Eric Colliary, Klein Curator of Theatre and Performing Arts at the Harry Ransom Center, the University of Texas at Austin. Before we hear the first presentation, let me say that our online viewers can ask questions and comment on our Facebook and YouTube streaming sites. We will respond to these as they come in or shortly after the symposium. Maria, can I ask kindly for your presentation?
Of course, good morning. My name is Maria Babicka. Thank you very much for introducing me. First and foremost, I would like to thank you all very much for the opportunity to participate in this conference and for having a chance to tell you about our project. At the beginning of lockdown in March 2020, the Polish Theatre Institute decided to invite 7 groups of scientists. It was 25 people to do the study of changes caused by the pandemic. As a result, they prepared 7 reports describing and documenting the condition of various aspects of theatrical life and this exceptional time. It was a large-scale study that captured the situation and now contributes to further analysis, drawing conclusions, and also advising science. Also, a book collecting conclusions from all the studies is being prepared. Today, as one of the coordinators of the implementation of the studies, I'm going to present the aim, scope, and conclusions of the research, describe initiatives taken on their occasions, and collect this as summarizing the research period and showing the crisis and potentials revealed by the pandemic in Polish theatre. But before I tell you about our research, I want to talk about the other initiatives started at the beginning of lockdown in our Theatre Institute. So what have we done at the beginning of lockdown? On the 12th of March in 2020, when the epidemic was introduced in Poland, we already have serious discussions in the Polish Theatre Institute, not only on the way of organizing remote work and the possibility of implementing activities planned for our co-workers and our partners, but we also started talking about the future and the needs to come. The activities of all cultural institutions, including theatres, have been suspended. Since the beginning of the Polish Theatre Institute, we have been trying to respond to the needs signaled by the theatre people, by the environment. In this unique situation, it was no different. We were watching the rapidly changing reality and thinking together about how to respond to it with sense. In the 2 months since pandemic was announced, we have taken many initiatives. We have started with getting access to the Zoom platform, which helped organizing work of our institution, but also maintaining contact with our co-workers and partners, because until then we have been meeting only face-to-face. What's more, we organize a series of webinars with the invited guests to look at various aspects of theatrical work during the pandemic. After the talks, we were inviting listeners to talk in smaller groups. An extremely important action initiated at the time was the expert group, the team of experts on the situation of theatre. The team was composed of representatives of the theatre community. Its work formed the basis for the Cultural Support Fund, a financial aid package for culture launched later in 2020. It was prepared for local government institutions, companies, and non-governmental organizations conducting cultural activities in the field of theater, music, and dance to apply for funds. It was really big help for them. Later, we also launched a psychological assistance program for people working in the cultural sector. What is important, all these activities were rank-and-file initiatives proposed and led by employees of our institution. But today, the most important and also rank-and-file initiative started at the beginning of lockdown is our research, and I want to tell you more about them. So let's talk about our purpose. We wanted to capture the impact of the pandemic on the theatre community in the first months of the pandemic. We wanted to use professional research tools and the skills of outstanding experts from all over Poland to acquire knowledge that would affect the development of people, theatres, and organizations, and thus may contribute to minimalizing risk and damage in the future. How did it start? The impulse to initiate the work was the publication by Bogna Kietlińska, a sociologist and cultural researcher known to some people from our institute. This publication was a survey directed to the theater audience during the lockdown. As a team of the Theatre Institute, consisting of Joanna Biernacka-Płoska, Maria Bogdaniuk, Justyna Czarnota, Krystyna Mogilnicka, and I, we prepared a broader concept involving both the study of the audience, including the special group of audience critics, and the theaters themselves, public, independent, and also amateur. We wanted to cover as many areas of theatrical life as possible. We wanted to create a complementary program that would constitute a scientific trace and record the state of the theater at the time of the crisis caused by the pandemic. We have designed 7 areas of theatrical activity, taking into account both the perspective of the audience and institutions, public and independent. As a result, we've got 7 reports. Those reports were created on the first one, strategies and activities of theater institutions during a pandemic from the director's point of view. Second one, about the situation of theater workers, but not only the artistic team, but also in the technical team, theater administration, educational and literary departments, and also audience service offices. A lot of theater people. Third one, theater audience. The next one, about the presence of theaters in online space from the perspective of viewers, theaters, and internet rages. Next one, about the situation of theater artists. A lot of people come to tell us about their situation. It was really big research. Next one, theater criticism. Situation of reviewers, researchers of theater. And the last one, report about amateur theater. And what after the research? This publication of the reports was only the first step for us in bringing the result to the general public. We conducted a series of meetings called New Forms of Existence, in which researchers presented the results of their research and compared them with the results of other studies, drawing new conclusions and predictions about the future of Polish theater. You can find these discussions on our YouTube. In addition, 4 research papers, including 2 in English, have been published in scientific journals since then. And what is more, teams of our researchers prepared articles with the main thesis, and by the end of this year, we plan to publish a book documenting Polish theater life in 2020. Okay, so time to conclusion of the research. I want to tell you about some of them in the last part of my speech. And I would like to share with you the conclusions that the editors of the book, Katarzyna Kalinowska and Katarzyna Kułakowska, have gathered from all the research. Their thesis will constitute the end of this book, but today I think that they can be a good point for our discussion, for reflection on how the theater life in Poland has been changing and may change in the future. We could compare it with a situation in your countries. So the last year has revealed many crises that affect the theater, but it also launched repair processes related to them. The pandemic has shifted the boundaries of what is private, what is intimate and hidden, and transferred to the public area the previously taboo problems of the theater community. Theater in the pandemic invites the society behind the scenes, where there are both difficult things as well as so far undiscovered opportunities. On the map of problems revealed by the pandemic, there are neglected employee matters, especially the social and emotional insecurity of all the theater workers. Opportunities, however, are the democratization of relations in theater institutions, environmental solidarity, as well as really important, the democratization of access to theater and faster opening up theater institutions to the needs of audience. Firstly, the period of the pandemic and related lockdown has shown the problem of underfinancing of the cultural sector, including theater, and the pathologies resulting from the financing system. Phenomena such as precarization of work, system of grants, and projectification phenomenon, low basic wages to mean that a large group of theater people remained with no sources of income or with a radical reduction of them last year. Another problem of the world of theater is inequalities within the environment, coming from differences in forms of employment and remuneration systems. This is a serious barrier to building solidarity in the theater world. The pandemic showed that there are common interests of the people of theater, and more broadly culture. There were some initiatives created to improve the situation of various professional groups. It seems that an important factor initiating pro-employment movements was free time, the lack of which before the pandemic effectively blocked the involvement of theater people in internal activities. The door to such activities was open when the production machine organizing the whole world of theater was stopped. Because people who see the problem and have the time and opportunities to deal with them can develop real support system for those most affected by the pandemic. Another crisis of Polish theater revealed in the pandemic results from theater hierarchies and a harmful production system. Many of the painful problems related to hierarchy and inequalities in the theatrical environment results from placing productive work above imitative work. It has been known for a long time. It doesn't anything new that theater is a hierarchical institution driven by production work. The world of theater revolves around the stage, premiere, and performances, as well as creative work on performances. Imitative work, I mean organizational, educational, promotional, also marketing and archiving, has always or almost always been marginalized, invisible in the background in theaters. The pandemic has overturned this order. It blocked the premieres and the possibility of playing, and discovered what was previously in the shadows. There were many situations with rank and file initiatives and situations in which people who haven't been noticed before have come to the fore. Parallel to the changes in the theater environment in the pandemic, the theater was opening up to the needs of the audience. Theater is perceived in Poland as an elite hermetic art. What is more, the largest theater centers are located in cities and sometimes in bigger towns. Online theater attracted a diverse audience, generated exceptional ranges because it broke the barriers to participation in theatrical life. economic barriers, geographic, logistic, and cultural, related to the way of life and lifestyle. Moreover, theaters as these remote cultural institutions offered not only performances, they dealt with theater education, invited audiences and spectators to visit the behind-the-scenes places of theaters or learn about the history of the institution, participated in social initiatives, integrated local communities, supported parents and teachers in organizing time for children, etc. The pandemic has shown that a theater that expands its offer can move out of an area reserved for connoisseurs and attract new viewers without losing a faithful audience. Theater that changes, cleans up, opens up, can be a remedy for pandemic fears and social deficits in closeness, contact, and meeting. Theater has a remarkable potential to heal individual and social crises, especially as it has become closer to people. The process we have examined in our research and described in our reports do not mean, however, that the pandemic magically healed the theater. Certain things it has certainly discovered, exposed, moved from the marriage to this center, which may be the first step to change. There was and still is a time of losses and opportunities for the theater. Post-pandemic theater faces many challenges to compensate for these losses and to take advantage of the opportunities. I wish this to all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marysiu. It's a very short and synthetic story of enormous work of last year and a half, actually. Now I would like to present Ramona Rydziewski, if I may.
Good afternoon. Many thanks to the Polish Theatre Institute and SIBMAS for inviting me to speak at today's virtual conference. It's a real privilege, especially as I'm sadly no longer attached to the National Collections of the Performing Arts, held by the V&A in London. As many of you know, the museum carried out a major restructuring programme earlier this year, which resulted in the dissolution of the dedicated Performing Arts department and a significant reduction in staffing. And for those of you wondering what happened to the collection, it remains at the V&A, along with the theatre performance galleries. However, the ability to continue developing a coherent and up-to-date collection, particularly in these pandemic times, is severely limited, if not altogether shut down. But I'm not here to talk about the V&A today. Instead, I want to use today's session to look holistically at the current state of play when collecting performing arts at a time of a major global pandemic, and as we're starting to re-emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, the challenges and opportunities we have. At the very heart of collecting and documenting the performing arts is a performance. This is tied to a specific time and place, performers, a creative team, and of course an audience. Collecting live performing arts presents its very particular challenges due to its intangibility. This was officially recognized in 2003 when UNESCO included the performing arts in its Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Heritage. It recognizes the cultural significance, but also the threats to its survival, which seems all very relevant at the moment. And also for context, the UNESCO's definition for the performing arts is broad and as follows. Quote, the performing arts range from vocal to instrumental music, dance and theatre to pantomime, song, verse and beyond. They include numerous cultural expressions that reflect human creativity. Unquote. At the past SIBMAS conference, a presenter picked up the challenge of intangible heritage, which included a long list of materials typically collected when trying to document the performing arts. These are not a representation of the performance itself, but rather the material remains. So this includes correspondence, contracts, photographs, set and costume designs, budgets, rehearsals, schedules, posters, programs, advertising leaflets and brochures, show reports, tickets, box office sales information, cuttings and reviews, costumes and set items, recordings, and of course much, much more. This isn't a complete list, but gives an idea of the usual approaches to documenting the live performing arts. But ever since this pandemic commenced and when we went into lockdown here in Europe in March 2020, I've been thinking on how to adequately document these extraordinary times, particularly its development and impact on the performing arts since. Live performances came to an abrupt end and almost everywhere in the world. Season programs were cut short, productions were postponed, and many eventually cancelled. But what processes are available to capture this lack of live performance activity? And also, how do we document a pandemic, its evolution and its impact? It seems that the digitization of our lives has been massively accelerated since the beginning of this COVID-19 pandemic. And we're all very familiar now with Zoom and Teams calls, virtual performances, digital tickets, COVID vaccination certificates, QR codes in our everyday life. But are our existing processes to document the live performing arts sufficient to capture a coherent account of the evolving pandemic? Is an accurate archival record of the performing arts industry in these pandemic times captured? And what we do capture, will it enable researchers in 5, 50 or 100 years get a full understanding, and is qualitative data relating to the pandemic and its impact on the performing arts available? Thinking about the pandemic, I've identified 5 areas that require consideration when collecting performing arts in these pandemic times. In summary, these are: first, performance data. Many will have heard me ask the question, what show happened when and where and who was in it? Now, this really needs to be expanded to what shows got postponed, rescheduled, or altogether cancelled. Secondly, the definition of a performance against the backdrop of virtual streams. Where are the boundaries of live? Thirdly, the pandemic had a global effect on the performing arts, but there are big differences at national and local levels that need attention. Fourth, it's the approach around collecting. Is it reactive or proactive? Before the pandemic, it was a challenge to stay up to date and on top of current performing arts developments. But now that's even more so, as the industry itself operates in rapidly changing environments and primarily in digital domains. And finally, digital. Dealing with digital content and its preservation has been a major challenge for archivists, librarians, and curators for years. This has become more urgent, and sustainable solutions are required. Otherwise, we risk the loss of vast amounts of archives and cultural heritage. So let me delve into these points in a little bit more detail. But before I do so, please bear in mind that some of the information I have will inevitably be focused on Britain, as this is where I was based throughout the pandemic. So the first consideration, performance data. As some of you probably know, I am slightly obsessed with performance data centered around the question, what show happened when and where and who was in it? This type of data is crucial to tracing production histories, the tracing of individual careers, and generally providing key information of performing arts activity over time and geographical areas. This type of data is generally not easily accessible and often requires research into programs and playbills, newspapers and cuttings, and other sources, such as the national initiative like the Australian All Stage Database. But of course, as the pandemic spread across the globe and country after country announced their pandemic measures, live performance came to an abrupt standstill. So for example, in London, the Old Vic Theatre was the first London theatre to announce the suspension of its performances on their Twitter channel on Sunday, the 15th of March. By complete coincidence, I actually ended up seeing their last performance on Saturday the 14th, which fittingly, as we headed in a pandemic, was Samuel Beckett's Endgame with Alan Cummings and Daniel Radcliffe. It was a very strange feeling that night, as closures seemed inevitable, with most of Europe already in lockdown and many theatre seats empty that night, despite a sold-out performance. And after the Ośrodk's announcement of closing temporarily down, many performing arts venues quickly followed suit, and it was eventually confirmed by the government's introduction of a national lockdown. But that really made me even think more about performance data. It's not just about capturing the data for shows that happened, but actually the shows that haven't happened, which were suspended, postponed, rescheduled, and many cancelled altogether. Of course, one might debate the need for such capture of performance data in the first place. However, only a significant data set will ever really deliver an accurate picture of the impact, the financial cost, how many individual professional lives were affected, and enable an accurate understanding on how the pandemic unfolded for future researchers. Also, this sort of data is needed within the context of physical items from the pandemic period. Physical items such as posters or leaflets for performances taking place last spring and summer will already have been in circulation, and they will make it into collections over time. So, for example, one of the acquisitions I made last year at the V&A was a poster advertising a tour for the British punk band The Damned, and the tour was due to take place in July 21. These concerts were eventually postponed and are now due to take place in early 22. But you don't notice when you're looking at the poster that clearly states July 21 for the tour. One can only hope that future collection managers and researchers will consider these dates carefully and don't take these posters at face value, with the dates as they were initially advertised. Moving on to the second consideration, actually, what is a performance? The difference between live, in-person performances versus live streams and versus streamed recordings. The pandemic finally delivered an overdue acknowledgement and recognition of archive recordings and live streams of performing arts. Spring 2020 really became the great spring of virtual theatre streams across the globe. Many organisations utilised the existing archive recordings. The National Theatre in London, for example, commenced a season of weekly YouTube streams. Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals were available for 24 or 48 hours. The Bolshoi and the Met Opera streamed archive recording, or, for example, the collaboration between the Academy of Arts in Berlin and the Berliner Ensemble making archive recordings available via the internet. These streams were generally free and donations encouraged. A number of different approaches to streaming were taken, but mostly with a premiere stream at a specific time and then available for a limited time afterwards. One can only imagine the amount of work and email spent on frantically clearing the rights to stream these recordings. What was interesting to observe was that some of the viewers' commentaries in stream chats were unaware of the archive nature of these recordings. I'm unable to access this information online anymore. But at the time, there were several users submitting chat queries why the National Theatre would still allow full audiences into live performances with no mask when the pandemic was in full swing. An explanation of the archival nature of the recording was quickly issued in the chat stream. However, it showed that the boundaries of live performances in the virtual world are blurred and not necessarily apparent. And a few months later, in summer of 2020, the first streamed live performances started to appear in Britain, usually with a small cast, minimal set, and no audience. The Ośrodek, for example, labelled it in-camera, private performances. These type of live streams would usually start with a pre-recorded introduction, usually by the theatre's director, explaining that the introduction is pre-recorded, but then clearly stating that the actual performance is live and taking place at the theatre in real time. After months of archive streams, the live nature of these stream shows brought a new energy to virtual viewings. It also meant that live productions would be accessible beyond the physical boundaries of theatres themselves and potentially to a global audience. These live streams from venues were usually charged, provided much needed income, but also making the production available to audiences who may never be able to travel to these venues in person. And as live performances with audiences restarted, many theatre companies adopted a blended approach, enabling live in situ performances, whilst also making provisions for virtual live broadcasts and encore recorded streams. I'd love to see more evidence and research into these models, as on paper, these blended approaches appear to enable an inclusive and accessible approach and an expanded offer by performing arts companies. It really will be interesting to observe how this model will continue and whether it will evolve and receive buy-in across the industry, especially as the high-end live streams to cinemas are also making a comeback now. And whilst these virtual streams are all very welcome, they do challenge the concept of a live performance. Does the audience have to be physically there? Does it matter to virtual viewers whether the performance is happening right at that moment or not? The boundaries have been blurred, and most venues offer virtual viewers a clear message about what's happening, so the viewer is aware whether it's a live performance or not. And moving on to this is really the third key consideration, the pandemic and its impact on performing arts at a global level versus a national local level. Whilst the pandemic affected performing arts communities worldwide, there are particulars at national and local level which need to be considered as part of the archival record of the pandemic. Across the world, governments came up with their various types of plans and roadmaps providing guidance for all sectors of public life, including the performing arts industry. England, for example, was one of the last European countries to hold live performance and locked down in March 2020. But I believe it was also the first country in Europe to allow live performances to return at full capacity and without making any restrictions mandatory in July 2021. At the same time, the so-called pingdemic took place, where individuals would receive a ping via the smartphone COVID's tracing app, notifying of close contact with a positive case and leading to days of isolation. For performing arts companies, that meant that performances often would be cancelled at the very last minute because cast members were pinged, and this was just frustrating for everyone. As theatres restarted in London over the past months, it is also interesting to observe how, for example, the big commercial shows only restarted very slowly. And interestingly, for the first time ever, there were a lot of offers and affordable tickets to be had, simply due to the lack of tourists being in London at the moment. How can these national and local pandemic nuances be documented? And since March 2020, the pandemic situation is constantly evolving, presenting the industry with ongoing challenges, which do seem far from over. It seems so important to capture these national and local pandemic timelines as they unfold and as part of the pandemic collection to provide critical context. And this leads me on to the fourth consideration. Really, it's our approach to collecting. Of course, due to the pandemic, only a limited amount of productions actually took place, resulting in a much smaller quantity of materials for potential additions to performing art collections. However, it is the rapid unfolding of the pandemic, the impact on the industry and the sector's ongoing recovery that requires attention and documentation. Time is of essence in the fast-moving environment and regular government directives, not just for the performing arts industry, but also us as individuals and professionals. There are several initiatives underway that address the pandemic and attempt at collecting performing arts materials. In a few minutes, Eric Calleri from the Harry Ransom Centre's Theatre Collections will talk about their Theatre 2020 project, but also, for example, the University of Bristol Theatre Collections, which has been awarded a grant from the National Archives to carry out a survey for theatre company collections at risk due to the pandemic. And there will be other projects worldwide. These ones are timely and very proactive approaches, which are highly commendable. And these collections will become very important archival resources over time. In normal times, most collecting organizations tend to be quite reactive in their collecting, meaning that collections and material may be offered a long time after the actual creation of the items, and the approach is in many cases by archive creators seeking a home for collections. At this time of rapid change, this approach is no longer tenable and time-sensitive collecting decisions need to be taken. Indeed, as the majority of materials are now digital and often on non-static virtual platforms, we are no longer awarded time nor hope that materials survive in storage boxes and in garages or under beds. Instead, most of the performing arts material during the pandemic and moving forward will be born digital. These are often in insecure, non-permanent platforms and at constant risk of disappearance. So if there's one message that has been clear for collection managers over the past 18 months, is that it is time to start moving towards a proactive collecting approach, identifying born digital content early, come up with methods and put processes in place to deal with these future archives. This type of material needs to be moved into digital archive preservation environments promptly, and working proactively and with content creators at an early stage. And that leads me neatly to my final and fifth key consideration, and that is dedicated to digital content and materials. And whilst I'm thinking both of digitized and born digital material, it is particularly the latter that are of huge archival concern generally, and even more so within the context of pandemic collecting of the performing arts. Urgent action is needed if we don't want to risk an exponentially growing archive content loss. Born digital has been around for several decades, which manifested itself in a growing decline of unique physical contents in contemporary archive collections such as correspondence, letters, faxes, physical notebooks, sketches, physical photographs. This shift to digital kicked in with full force in the late 2000s when digital photographs and emails became part of everyday life, followed by arrival of smartphones with ever-increasing storage capacity, massive data plans, and social media platforms. Society's digitization has accelerated during the pandemic. Digital vaccine passports, QR passcodes to check in to theatres, digital e-tickets and digital cast lists and programs are the new normal. Agile virtual working has been implemented across workplaces with collaborative working across SharePoint and Teams now the norm. However, with the majority of content and future archive materials now created and stored digitally, there is the significant risk to loss of content and context for the performing arts. So what next? What is the solution? There is no easy or cheap solution. If there was, I'm sure the challenges around collecting and preserving, particularly digital material, would long be solved. But as we are all realizing the digitization of everyday life in these pandemic times, there is an opportunity to move forward proactively. The explosion of virtual theatre and its resulting digital archive files, with creators, may actually be a really great hook to get the conversation started beyond our own community, and with funders and senior managers that can really affect change. We need to acknowledge that the majority of performing arts collection materials destined for libraries, archives, museums and documentation centres are digital now, and that they are at risk, if not lost already. And when looking back to the 1970s, there are actually parallels when suddenly the quantities of physical materials in archive collections exploded simply because everyone had access to copiers and printers. So the parallels to the especially 2000s and 2010s are in the digital world. Everyone had laptops, computers, internet, digital photography, but the quantity of digital content has exploded even more than all the physical printed material in the 70s and 80s. But we now are no longer for the time of material sitting physically in boxes somewhere, but we're faced with technical obsolescence and not being able to access all the digital materials or their storage units after some time. We really do need to adapt our collecting and archival practices to be more responsive. One such way forward is to work more proactively with the performing arts community directly. Performing arts organizations with their own in-house archive units are at an advantage as their archive function is part of their company's activities. But most performing arts companies do not have an internal archive unit. In my experience working with companies and providing even high-level advice on how to manage, for example, the digital photographs and what data to keep alongside these photographs will go a long way. So there is now the real opportunity to engage with these organizations, especially as they create virtual recordings and streams, which will be of archival value in times to come. Working with these creators now and providing basic information management supports on managing the data, files and related info such as rights and licensing means that the digital content is likely to be looked after in a more careful manner and will remain available. Another opportunity arising out of the pandemic is that we as a community interested in the performing arts have become more digital ourselves and don't have to rely on being traveled to in-person events. We can work together more collaboratively, digitally, as we do right now, and use our limited time more effectively, not just at a local, but also international level. I want to mention, for example, the digital working group established by the Association for the Performing Arts, which is active in the UK and Ireland a few years ago. It's a small network that enables knowledge sharing and working together on all things digital, such as the long-term preservation of digitized and non-digital archive recordings, which tend to be usually very large files, and present their own challenge. And this working group really enables a platform to share information, talk about real world experiences, and really start making things happen. And in regards to the challenging of managing digital content and its digital preservation, I really would like to see the community working towards more consortium solutions as well. The cost for the technology, infrastructure, and ongoing maintenance are prohibitive for many heritage organizations, but this needs to be addressed urgently. Within the library sector, there are many consortium approaches to spread costs, for example, for library management systems and e-subscriptions, but I'm not aware of any of these approaches for the management of digital archive data and its long-term preservation, especially not within the performing arts community. And finally, I'd also like to see SIBMAS to become more of a facilitator, enabling the exchange of knowledge. For the past decade, I've been fortunate to be able to attend SIBMAS conferences in person, and I've been able to build up a wonderful international network of like-minded performing arts heritage professionals. But many people will not be able to travel to such events. So smaller and virtual events like today's with a specific focus or theme may provide a more affordable and inclusive access to a brilliant network and knowledge. And on this note, I'd like to finish, and I really would like to hear from you and what is your take on pandemic collecting. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ramona. Now I would like to ask for the third presentation, Eric Collieri.
Hello, good morning from Austin, Texas. I'm honored to be here and deeply grateful to the team at SIBMAS and the Polish Theatre Institute for everything they've done to make today possible. I'm the curator of the Theater and Performing Arts collections at the Harry Ransom Center. It's an international archive, library, and museum at the University of Texas at Austin. I've been invited to speak about our efforts to document the impact of the pandemic and its related events on the performing arts industry. So in March of 2020, as more and more theaters around the world continued to close during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, I began hearing from actors, directors, playwrights, and other theater people. How did the theater respond in other times of closure? Did performances move outdoors during pandemics? What did theater people do for money? How long did theater closures last? Was there any government private aid for the arts? How long did it take for the industry to recover? And how was theater changed in these moments? And it was fascinating to me because this is a sort of a rare moment for me where I hear from theater artists who are looking back to history to understand the present moment. And there's a great deal of evidence from these earlier closures in libraries and archives around the world. Think about the closure orders from the Lord Mayor of London in 1666, which were reprinted in Daniel Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year. Our own collections at the Ransom Center preserve articles on the 1918 influenza outbreak, including programs for benefit productions, letters from performers stuck out on tour and unable to travel. The collections also reveal that the instability caused by the theater closures in 1918 influenced the decision for the Actors' Equity Strike in 1919 in the United States. And the result of the strike has had lasting impacts on the theater industry even to this day. Minimum salaries, rehearsal pay, having hot water and dressing rooms, return fare if a production closed while it was on tour. So we know that events such as these have long-lasting impacts on the profession in ways that go beyond the closure itself. And so it got me thinking about how historians and artists would look back at the current pandemic. As Ramona mentioned, so much is happening in the digital sphere. We're getting cancellations, press releases, emails, virtual performances, text messages, social media updates. And I realized that if we're not proactively collecting this material, that it wasn't going to linger around like physical material might. We risk losing it forever. So here at the Ransom Center, we're fortunate to have a robust digital collections program with a full-time Born Digital archivist on staff. I worked with our Born Digital archivist, Brenna Edwards, to create a strategy for collecting digital files. And what we landed on was a registration page where theater artists and theater companies could register using an embedded Google form. The registration also includes an abbreviated version of our acquisitions agreement, saying that any material sent to the project will be preserved according to the center's collecting standards. And as part of registration, participants can also state whether they will allow the material they contribute to be available online through our digital collections page anywhere around the world, or whether it will be available only on site in our reading room here in Austin, Texas. So when someone registers, I manually create a folder on the cloud storage platform box.com with that person's name, and then email them a link with instructions on how to upload material. Any files they upload go directly to their own unique folder. And then periodically, Brenna then downloads the contents of the box folders and backs them up to our preservation servers. We launched this platform, what we call the Theater 2020 project, almost exactly a year ago. And as of this morning, we've received 2,433 digital files from just over 200 participants, and it continues to grow every day. So let me give you just some examples of the kinds of things that we're receiving. In March of 2020, Chicago playwright Brian James Pollock set up a phone number where other playwrights could call in and they could leave a voicemail message sharing how they were feeling just a week into the lockdown, how they're feeling, what their hopes and fears are, where they're at, and sort of what they're expecting for the weeks to come. Brian collected these recordings for his podcast, The Subtext, and shared them with us as part of the Theater 2020 project. And it's become this sort of really powerful time capsule from early in the pandemic. Many early career playwrights who were building momentum and about to break it big, only to have their productions canceled. It really sort of captures this moment of anxiety about what the future of the industry is and also the future of their own careers. London-based digital projection designer Nina Dunn went to a number of closed theaters in the West End and photographed the empty stages, prop tables, and dressing rooms. She compiled these photographs into a book called The Dark Theaters Project, and you can see costumes waiting for performers to return, and even in one case, rehearsal scripts that were on the floor of the theater. You could see that mice had been chewing at the pages. We're hearing from theater companies that have decided to close permanently, and they've shared press releases and internal communications about how those decisions were made. Other theaters that have shifted to streaming performance have included recordings of rehearsals and the performances themselves to the project. Hijinks Theatre in Cardiff in England works with performers with learning disabilities or who are on the autism spectrum. They not only create theater and film, they create a space for members of the community to come and connect with each other. And during the shutdown, they met over Zoom to continue rehearsals and to play theater games. The recordings that they shared of these are a reminder that theater isn't just about presenting work. It's a social experience. It connects us. And artists worked during the pandemic to figure out ways to maintain and strengthen those connections when we couldn't physically be together in person. There's also projects that are happening that aren't really easy to document, even digitally. Nzinga Williams, for example, serves as the company manager for the Atlantic Theater in New York. And in May of 2020, she launched the new Black Mutual Aid Fund to provide emergency funds to Black theater artists. Using Twitter and Instagram, she solicited funds through platforms like Cash App and Venmo. And then Black theater artists could request funds through a Google form, and then she would distribute the funds to them directly. The only digital files she created are either social media posts or very sensitive financial information, so we couldn't collect those. But we realized it was very important to be able to document her project. So we decided to start recording oral history interviews alongside the material that people were submitting to the project. Just to be able to document the important work that they're doing and be able to capture it in the archive. There's so much more that people have shared, but for the sake of time, I'd just like to mention some of the challenges that we've encountered so far in the collecting process. First, there's the challenge of labor. At the Ransom Center, I'm the only staff member who's the sort of primary person working on this project. I process registrations, I send out invitations, I publicize, I review material to ensure the files are being submitted successfully, and I respond to all questions about the project. It's a lot to do on top of my other duties as curator for the Center's Performing Arts collections. And we've never done a sort of a proactive grassroots collecting project like this before. We normally collect collections assembled by creators like Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams, or by theater companies, something that's already been assembled by someone else, and then we collect it. This kind of collecting has really been a learning process for all of us here. For theater companies and artists, I will often send out invitations and hear back from them. If I hear back from them at all, I hear back saying, a lot of our staff have been furloughed or laid off. It's just me in the office now, they'll say, and really we don't have the bandwidth to participate in this project. And this is something that's helped us to realize that we'll have to continue collecting and loop back around to artists and companies again at a later date to try to collect material from this time period. This is a bit of a challenge because what we're finding too is that as time goes by, people's memories of what happened during this period change, and they forget what happened, for example, in April of 2020, even a year later. And similar to what Ramona was saying about how these files are easily, they can be lost quite easily. The platforms themselves are not stable. It takes a bit of work on behalf of the person submitting the files to collect all this stuff together, to be able to identify it, to be able to download it off different platforms, to be able to, get recordings from theater companies when playwrights, for example, have had their work done. It certainly takes a lot of time and effort. And I think what this project has also underscored is that a lot of theater companies and artists are not proactively thinking about documenting their material in general. And so when we come to them and we say, we're really interested in documenting your work and helping sort of create an archive about this moment, we're also hearing from people that we just don't know what that means. That we, that theaters don't have a point person really on their staff who are actually taking this responsibility on even beyond the pandemic, right? So I feel like there's certainly a lot of work to be done on the part of collecting institutions to be able to continue to work with theater companies and artists to enable them and empower them to collect their work. We're also tending to hear from artists who were especially who were active during the pandemic. And these are folks who've created new works, they've produced virtual festivals, they've held workshops on making performances more equitable for everyone. There's a lot of people who are very, very active during this past year and a half. And what we're having a hard time representing in the collection are the many artists who were unable to work. And for those for who the weight of the closure and the pandemic was so overwhelming that they weren't really active during the shutdown. And those are really important stories to represent too, because I'm thinking back again to early in the pandemic when artists were reaching out and asking about how other artists responded in this moment. It's actually really helpful for people to hear that this isn't easy, and that not everybody can be productive and generative in these moments, and then that's okay. That's part of the story too. And so finally, I'll say that one of the other biggest challenges we've had is just getting the word out. On the one hand, we've had 200 participants, which is a great response, what we thought would be a great response. But on the other hand, it's just obviously just such a small representation of the global response to performance. And of those 200 participants, they all come from only about 3 or 4 countries. So we're not really geographically diverse either. Collecting around the pandemic is a huge project, and it is not something that any one institution can take on. And I'm very grateful to the folks at the University of Bristol, who I know have also been very actively just starting to collect around the pandemic themselves with the help of this grant. I'm also, I've heard from folks at Waseda University in Tokyo, the Tsubuchi Museum, who they have been collecting playbills specifically for theater productions that had closed early in the pandemic. So it's a very specific kind of thing that they're collecting, but they've digitized those programs and made them available as an online exhibit. And it is a very powerful thing to sort of to look through these and sort of visually see the performances that either never made it in front of an audience or were closed prematurely. So we're still collecting. The pandemic has lasted longer than we had anticipated when we launched this project, and we realized that it's important to continue even as theaters are reopening, and for some time after, to really document how the pandemic is impacting the profession in a sort of longer term way. So we're still collecting, and likely will be for some time. So for anyone watching, I'd ask if you can help spread the word. You can find information and registration about the Theater 2020 project on the Ransom Center's website, which is at www.hrc.utexas.edu/theater2020, and that should get you to the page. So again, I want to thank SIBMAS and the Theatre Institute in Poland for coordinating this program today, and to thank everyone who's participating virtually. And I really look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, all of you. That was truly inspiring and very, very, very interesting. I would like to proceed now to a short panel discussion. I'm happy to welcome our panelists and to announce that Eric, Ramona, and Maria will be joined by Bernice Chan from the International Association of Theatre Critics, Hong Kong, Nick Leonhardt from Ludwig Maximilians Universität in München, and Alan Jones from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, Glasgow. It's great to have you all here. I will start by asking about your impressions and reflections on the keynote presentation. I'm sure you have comments and questions you would like to ask to our speakers. Let me just remind our online viewers that there is a possibility to ask questions and comments on our streaming sites on YouTube and Facebook. We will respond to these as they come in or shortly after the symposium. And if I could ask Alan Jones now to open the discussion.
Well, thank you very much for those presentations. I think it was very interesting to hear, how people responded differently to a situation that we didn't know quite how to handle. I'm curious about. I'm curious about what the effects will be for us. I think a lot of you touched on different areas about how things were going to possibly change. Certainly from my point of view, in a library which is designed for teaching artists or creating a space where artists can become creative individuals, I think we've changed in how we work and how we function. So, I mean, I'd like to open that question up to everybody. How do you think the pandemic will have made things change for us? Or you can approach it from teaching as well.
Should we go in any particular order, or?
I don't think so. We're just six of us. We can just talk and yeah.
Eric, would you like to go first?
Well, I'll just say, it's changing in so many ways. It's changing, I think, thinking about equity and thinking about how the pandemic has really given people the time to take a step back and say, this is the way the profession is working well, and these are ways that it's definitely not working and it's not sustainable. and it needs to, this is a time when we need to figure out how that's going to change when we return to live performance. And I think, both Maria and Ramona also touched on this too. I think digital performance is something that isn't going to go away. And it's something that I think people are having a different understanding of how digital performance and liveness interact with each other, and what the value. I mean, the National Theater, well, not just the National Theater, but the National Theater is a great example. But I'm thinking of also the Berliner Ensemble when they were presenting their work online for a period of time. I remember hearing from researchers who did work at the Berliner Ensemble archives on Brecht, and didn't realize that they had early recordings of Mother Courage until it was live streamed as part of their programming. Like, that's amazing. And to make that accessible widely is huge. And I think that theaters are going to look at these archival recordings of performances not just as research and resources, but as an extension of the performance itself, and figure out ways to. I've had many conversations with like Concord Theatrics, formerly Samuel French, with the Dramatists Guild, and with other unions and literary agencies in the United States, about how contracts are being rewritten to accommodate digital performance, and how the recordings can be used by the companies in the future. So lots of things I think are going to change out of this moment. Those are just a few thoughts.
Yeah. Can I maybe add to this one? And it's a really interesting point, kind of, which I did try and pick up on my presentation. I think, and I hope, to be honest, that virtual performances, whether it's live or kind of a future live stream, it's that kind of what is live, what's not, will continue, because I now find it actually really frustrating now that sort of my, theatre word has broadened, internationally to the languages I speak. So there's some limitations. It's now actually really frustrating that the word is a little bit closing in again when things aren't broadcast virtually. I think I told some of you I'm in Ireland at the moment, but there is a show I really want to see in Dublin, and I can't get a ticket. They're not streaming, and it's so frustrating. I almost take it as kind of, a given. Things are digital now. If I can't get a ticket, I do digital. And that actually picks up a really interesting point which Maria made. It is kind of enabling access. It's democratization to theatre. Some people may, for whatever reason, never go to theatre, whether it's physically, money, and often these virtual recordings are a lot more affordable than a real ticket, or you can kind of pay as little as much as you want. And that actually really democratized access and made things, far more accessible. And I think for us as well, I feel a little bit kind of in the cold at the moment. We're not having officially a large performing arts collections, but it actually, there's a real opportunity to jump on as people have realized the value in these recordings at that present time, or in as archival recordings, actually, that they do have a life and that they're important, but you do need to look after them, and they are information professionals who can help you with this. And there is a real opportunity to be out there and champion what we do, and that we want to work with people to help preserve this virtual and digital legacy, and then hopefully extending it to other materials, not just recordings.
Can I echo on Ramona's points? Because I also feel frustrated about seeing these online performances from Hong Kong. And actually, I think for most of the international festivals, they are now going to a hybrid kind of format with face-to-face performance and also live streaming. But in some case, I think in Hong Kong, it's really still hard for us to approach some of the festivals in a global context, because I think it may, due to the problem of the access from different areas, because some of the plays maybe due to the copyright issues, they can only show it in a local context. not an international context. So even though I really looking forward to join some of the international festivals, which I used to join physically, but still I cannot be able to access these festivals through an online participation. So I think it creates me also kind of frustration as an Asian participant who used to, join these festivals in a face-to-face context. And I'm also quite interested about the definition on, and also Ramona just talked about the boundaries of theaters and live theaters to be recorded. Because in Hong Kong, in IATC, we also concerning about how our theaters in local productions turn into our online version. But in fact, for us, it's also hard to find the definition of what is online performance, because it's still pre-recorded performance could be regarded as an online performance, but there's really some other kinds of more creative way of doing live performances online. So I think it's a really interesting and also meaningful discussion for us to have a special topic on how to define an online production. And also for some cases in Hong Kong, and I also know also for some Asian cities in our Asian areas, because still our borders are closed at the moment. So for our local festivals, like the Hong Kong Arts Festivals, even though we have lots of programs, but they are all focused on our local artists. I think it's to us a very a positive way to know about this, because we have more resources and more focus on our local practitioners and also our artists. But on the other hand, I think we also have difficulties that we have to face is about how to make our international cultural connections and also these kind of exchanges to be able to continue. I think it's a little bit still some of the this kind of productions, they're having online practice and also some online ways to do this kind of collaboration. But still, I think it's really meaningful for us to have more discussion about how are we going to do with a cultural exchange, just like our SIBMAS Congress for next year. I'm really looking forward to see you all in person, but still I think it's really a difficult questions to answer at this moment. So I think the focus on local artists is something that we are really looking forward to see in Hong Kong, even though after the pandemic, I think it's more we should put more focus and resources for our local artists as well. And also as another issues that I would like to respond from Ramona's sharing is about the audience statistics, because I also know that even though you sell tickets online for local for online productions, but it may not the audience, the number of audience, it may be more than one, because people may get our whole family can enjoy the show through online. So how can you actually calculate the number of audience for online performance? It becomes a very interesting question to me. And also, and other things is I'm also concerning about some underprivileged families or also underprivileged people. They may not have the resources and also the technical support for getting online. So it creates another problem of how they could enjoy the theaters, even though during the pandemic. Of course, for us, we have a very convenient way to get ourselves online. But I think in some of the Asian countries, in particular, they may not have this kind of resources. So how are we going to document and to know more about situation, about the loss of our audience during the pandemic? Is also an issue that I would like to address in this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernice. Maybe Ramona, will you start answering? for this?
Ooh. There's a lot in there. Sorry, I was making a note because Bernice, your last message was actually really interesting one. I haven't quite thought that far. You know, that I'm kind of looking that online is so accessible. I mean, when you have internet, which I didn't have yesterday. And, you know, and it's you've made completely good point there. You know, yes, online performances may be cheaper and more accessible, but, you know, there might be actually families out there that, you know, won't have the equipment or actually the money. And there's actually, again, and I'm thinking very much with my hat of my new role, because I now work in two of the London boroughs as service lead for archive collections, and we have a lovely network of public libraries, and I'm thinking that is actually potentially really good community engagement program. I had to write that down because, you know, it's all about, you know, democratization of access, and, you know, who is there, who's trusted to deliver recordings, especially on a really strict limitations of, you know, when you do public screenings of things. So, you know, public libraries might fit in quite nicely there. So I'm digesting that information, I have to admit. But it really has opened up so many new avenues, I think. And I think I probably could talk about this for hours, but I do really hope that the industry kind of really goes with it. And the main reason why I'm saying this is because I really have noticed, you know, some companies have really embraced it, you know, and some production companies are really seem to be making it part of their programming now, which is really forward thinking. And I'm assuming kind of, you know, a new income stream for them. And as you say, you don't know how many people are actually watching, but at least you know the devices, you know, that's a starting point. But like, I've also noticed that some places that have done it before don't do the streaming anymore. And, you know, I do worry that there might be some real purists out there. Live theatre has to be in a theatre, in a venue. We don't do live streams or encore streams. I know it sounds probably a bit silly, but, you know, it is a little bit of a worry I'm starting to have, simply because I can see things are declining, and I don't know whether it's just me loving theatre that much or whether there isn't a demand for it. And that is, I think, something, as I picked up in my paper, is like, I'd really like to have some more data, you know, that maybe evidences it, but I don't quite know where to get it, because ultimately that is commercial data held by theatres and companies themselves. So I don't know whether Eric may have had some more in his wonderful 2020 collection. I feel like, Eric, you're putting us all to shame, because you were, you know, I've for years been preaching about proactive collecting, because with digital you have to, you know, it's kind of you snooze, you lose. And I think you really took that opportunity, and I'm really pleased you did, because I think it will be like one of the few resources probably in the English-speaking world that will be available.
If I can follow up with that and just say, yeah, thank you for that. And I agree, access is so crucially important. It's also on the side of the theater companies themselves and the artists that access is tricky when it comes to digital performance. There's a huge investment up front, right? And sort of multi-camera production. And it is, I think, you know, and you're absolutely right. There's a difference between recording live performance for digital consumption versus creating something that is really meant for a digital medium. Those are sort of two separate things, but they're all still something you have to be very conscious of as you're creating it. It is either an artwork in itself or an extension of the artwork. It's not something that you do on the side, and that is expensive. It's and beyond the reach of a lot of theater companies. And so, you know, to add to, you know, the call on behalf of performing arts collections and SIBMAS to sort of help think about ways that we could collaborate to create, for example, like digital, like a collective digital storage server for our respective collections. I would also say it would be incredibly helpful for our field to figure out ways that we can assist theater companies in setting up these kinds of digital digital assets and digital recordings, not only for archives, but hopefully as ways that they can also see additional revenue streams and think about access in a way that that they haven't been able to do before. Because even, there's certainly issues with internet access, but I've heard from so many people who have hearing impairments, and they can get it'll be subtitled on their screen, or have mobility issues, and especially for historic theaters where it's difficult to get in, or it's just impossible for them to go out to the theater otherwise. So this is a big shift, but hopefully a good one, and one that the profession takes on.
Ramona, yes. Yeah, first Ramona and then Maria.
I might let Maria go first because I've got a very different question, so I let Maria go first.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. I want to add that this situation and this issue about online performances, I agree with you that it's really difficult and really expensive situation. There are so many difficulties connected with that. But as I said, I think that it connected with opening up to the needs of the audience. And it is so important that in my point of view, I think that it's not only access to find a way to show the performances, to watch performances on the places where it wasn't possible before, but what's more, there's opportunity to make new activities for audience, and that's great now because we show that educational, that workshops are improving, that there are so many new ways to meet, and in our research there are many situations where many stories about the way that theater help people like that, not only to watch performances, but to meet each other with this theater online situation, in discussions, in talking with each other. For example, seniors, older people who can't leave home because it's not safe for them. And that's the best thing of that, I think, and something which could give us really, really better situations to be each other.
Definitely.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Can I maybe move on? We have been talking a lot about recordings, but one of the things which kind of, do you want to add something, Nick, to the recordings, or?
No, go ahead. Please go ahead.
No, I just want to really ask, in terms of the pandemic, one of the things that kind of really described the pandemic for me and kind of the impact on the performing arts industry is that so much happened on social media. So what happened was all on social media. The announcements of when theatres closed, the announcement when things reopening, when we had the pandemic in the UK, when, with 10 minutes before curtain up, suddenly shows were closed, or, scene change, which was collaborative between theatre designers, kind of really trying to, kind of spotlight, the challenge of the kind of designers who are pretty much all freelancers and were suddenly out of work and no income for months. And it all happened in social media. And has anyone thought about how to capture that? And that's kind of what I was trying to hint at with the timeline, because it's almost these real kind of fleeting instances appearing on the internet if you're lucky enough to look and scroll that far, but then once they happen, they're gone, and whether companies might delete them or not, or just buried. But how do we keep that context, because so much happened? And I don't know whether anyone has tackled that or knows of anyone who's at least tried. Eric is nodding.
We're trying. It's labor, right? This takes a lot of time if you've been posting on social media, to go back through it, then to back it up. Twitter at least gives you a download feature, but it only captures your posts. It doesn't capture comments to your posts. So you don't get a sense of interaction or people's responses to an announcement that you've made, for example. And so that's a huge limitation. So I encourage people to do screenshots, but we're talking like it's been a year and a half now. A year and a half of screenshots of people's social media posts is a lot to ask someone to go back through and do. And so it's honestly, it's a real concern, and really one that the social media platforms themselves need to be able to offer a better feature to preserve this stuff, because it's not an easy thing to do. The Library of Congress, and I think even the British Library also at one point were thinking about trying to archive all of Twitter, and quickly realized that was impossible, and they did it for a few years and stopped. But it is absolutely true, and in the same way of social media, I also would loop in text messages with that. So I've had several conversations with people in theater companies when I would say, like, well, okay, so how did that decision to close the theater, what did that look like? What was the communication like? And they said, well, it was all happening over text message. I said, well, do you still have them? Can you screenshot those? And how do you, because those are the messages in the moment. That's really where the nitty gritty of decision-making and conversation and process is really happening. And really, there's not a good way to back those up either.
Nick, you wanted to say something? Yes.
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank all speakers for wonderful presentations, and you get my biggest admiration for all the work and labor and effort you put into your work during the last the past few months. This is really incredible what you did. I have a couple of things, and I can't imagine that we can cover them all. Maybe coming back to the screenshots, because that I had that question on my list of questions when Ramona was speaking about the performance data that she's so much in love with. I was wondering, so are they? No, you're an archivist and curator and manager. It's absolutely fine. I'm a researcher, so I'm one of the guys who's using your expertise, and I need you, and my students need your collection. So I come from a completely different perspective. And I'm a historian, and I love to go to archives physically, and I'm still very grateful about any digitized finding that I can work with, because otherwise, since I work globally, my research could not be done. So it's impossible for me to do global theater history without digitized material. No question. But I was thinking what kind of new performance data would come into play in the framework, within the framework of digital theater, digital and online performances. And I'm glad you mentioned screenshots as one new source material. And I was wondering, since I started following you, Eric, on Twitter, so what's this guy doing, and how many is he? So it's my big admiration, Eric. It's great what you did. I cannot really believe that you're the only one doing that at your collection. But it's so many new things and new source material, and also new skills that are required. Ramona, you said you said, I quote you in your talk, you said, we have to become digital ourselves. So I think you meant there's another addition to what you as a curator need to do in your everyday life as a curator and collector, and it's immense. We have to do the same, since scholarly work has to be communicated digitally as well. And if you don't do it, it's fine, but you are invisible on a global scale. So we face the same challenges, so to speak. So I just wanted to say that the screenshots as one new performance data format is one that I'm very interested in. The other thing I was thinking in the beginning, when Alan gratefully in his presidential address mentioned the topic of the 2018 conference in Paris, working successful together. And then we came up with the idea of naming this little event today, the Global Disconnections. And I was wondering, if that's correct at all to speak of global disconnection, since we are now here and it feels so connected. And we should have had that event last year already, I have the feeling, and that we could have learned so much more from each other a year before, and maybe had collected even more material. And had created even more accesses to collections and to knowledge. So that's something, it's an observation, it's not a question, but it's an observation I made. So were we right in proposing this topic? I think we were right, but I think it's a perfect fit also to, as a consequent conference or symposium to the 2018 one, where we talked about working successful together, because now we have here various possibilities and options and wishes on the table that we can continue working successfully together on. So that's an observation I had. So it's many things in my head at the moment, and I want to do another event of that kind next week already. So it's really great. I have a few more things, but I don't want to spend too much time speaking.
No, we still have time. We have to finish before 5:20 or 5:30. So we have.
Oh, I see. Yeah, but I don't know whether my friends want to respond to that or not. I keep my notes.
I think Eric wants to respond.
Yeah. Yes, I think. One of the things that's been driving at least our collecting too has been researchers who've been already asking questions at this moment and trying to then figure out, okay, well, how can we respond to that? What kinds of material do we need to collect to be able to answer those questions? One of those big questions has been financial data about, and actually the theater companies and scholars are asking the question, is digital performance financially sustainable? And are they actually being able to support themselves with those income streams? It's very hard to get that kind of data from theater companies. As you can imagine, this is something that they're holding very close to them. Theater producers also in commercial theater have a habit of not wanting to share data about what they're working on and what they're doing. And so getting them represented in the collections is like, and I've had interviews with them where they say, it's actually a shame because we should be much better about sharing these things, but because there's a sort of culture of secrecy, they don't want other people knowing what they're working on or what the financial impact is. They're not sharing that information. But in terms of screenshots and how artists are documenting the work too, whether it's through a digital initiative like this or something else, I personally, when I'm talking with artists, I really try to encourage them to think about documentation as an extension of the artwork itself, and not necessarily just the remnants, the remains, but that it can be, especially for projects that are otherwise hard to capture archivally, you have to think about documentation as an extension of the artwork, or as a separate artwork in some cases itself. Thinking creatively about how we document is crucial to anything we do, whether it's digital or not.
Yeah, Bernice? We cannot hear you.
Sorry, I have to turn on the mic. In the beginning of the pandemic, in Hong Kong, we have some theater companies. They do have a very quick response of putting their archives or their past performance online. It's because there usually are those big theater companies or with support from the governments that they can do better archives before the pandemic. So it creates them kind of an advantage to keep a close connection with their audience online by the time when we had the pandemic in Hong Kong. But those small, so this kind of the pandemic situation actually aroused awareness of those small theater companies that they need to start to do their video archives with a good quality. So in case that something happened afterwards, they can still having some online shows to make the connection and engagement with the audience. So I think the pandemic actually creates a positive, something positive for our small theater companies to start to think about how to do their archives professionally, and in particular for those video recordings. I think is a positive side that I know from Hong Kong, and also I would like to also talk about the because ITC Hong Kong are also trying to engage some research and some research papers, or even though our scale is not that big, but still we would like to do some documentations of the from the this how the environment of Hong Kong theatre changed. But I think it's a little bit hard for us to collect those information, as Eric just mentioned about, because during the pandemic, I think it's really, everyone is not in a very good mood to share the information with us, even though we said we are trying to document something for the research in the future, but still everyone is not in that right mood, except I think for our, like us as researchers. So it's really hard to collect info or data from our theatre practitioners. But afterwards in Hong Kong, because we start to open up the theatres gradually, even though by the last year, starting from the autumn last year. So everyone starts to become very busy. So they don't have time for us as a researcher to share their information with us when they are actually starting their actual performance and presentations on stage. So it creates a lot of obstacles for us as a researcher to collect this information. And also, I also would like to echo to something really practical and the situation that I now encounter in Hong Kong. I'm talking about the house program, the physical printed materials of the house programs. Because in Hong Kong, we usually, people are quite, house program is very important for us as researchers to collect information from for over the years, and also we may collect different kinds of leaflets from the venues. But because during the pandemic, we have encounter difficulties of the closure of the venues. So because of this situation, the theatre companies, they cancel the show canceled. That's one thing that we encounter. And also the numbers of printed materials, they may not, because they don't think there's a need for them to print those materials to put in the venues, because actually there's no people to visit the venues. So it creates a lot of difficulties for us to collect those information from the venues, and we can only rely things online. But online things we will encounter a lot of difficulties that Eric just mentioned. So I think it's really kind of a lot of obstacles and also problems that we need to encounter during the pandemic and after the pandemic as well.
Ramona?
Can I actually pick up kind of what you were just saying, Bernice, about kind of digital programs and tickets, and going back to Nick's observation of my slight obsession with data. At the V&A, which was really my very first organisation ever to working with live performing arts, the founding collection was Miss Enthoven's collection of 80,000 playbills that has been expanded into hundreds of thousands. And that is like the DNA of live theatre in the UK. It's kind of, whenever we're offered a costume or any items, usually we would go back to whatever venue, go through then the year, find a program, because that kind of really gives us an idea of what are we dealing with. Which actors, maybe have some photographs of costumes, even if they're black and white. At least if you say looking at a costume, then you can match things up. So it's almost an authoritative record that is relatively safe in a box in a pretty decent environment. But now, that we're in this real digital world where we don't have, sorry, I do actually have a prop, a physical ticket, a little bit of the Abbey, very resourceful office at my friend's house. These physical things do not exist anymore, or are very limited. I mean, I go to theatre a lot in London. I have not had a single physical ticket in the last 3 months. It's all virtually sitting somewhere in my email or my Apple Wallet. And, we're losing that real DNA, and kind of real content. That's why I feel like I'm even more obsessed now with data, because, my original vision was really to move Miss Enthoven's physical programs to start really kind of taking that key data out and bringing it together into a database, very much like Offstage creating UK Stage, so that it's virtually accessible to researchers like yourself, Nick, and anyone else, because most people really just want the information rather than the physical thing. When people want to find out Granny so-and-so and which show she was in. However, as we literally started kicking off implementing UK Stage, sort of my final months of the V&A, because we had a 6 months pilot project to use the Glastonbury Festival data. You have to start somewhere. We thought nobody has captured that data yet, and Glastonbury was 50, so we started doing that last year. And as we were working on this project, obviously the pandemic hit, and Glastonbury 2020 had been announced, it was known as 50th anniversary. They issued the running order in early March on their social media, so good luck trying to scroll back on that. And then about 2-3 weeks later, they had to say, actually, sorry folks, we're going to have to cancel it. And we had just created a record in advance for the Glastonbury Festival and the dates where it was going to happen and all the stages. And then, we had to start implementing actually how do we document cancelled performances? And you really have to start developing a new mindset, but also you could see the value of really documenting that. And that's not just for me being kind of a nerd, but also for a researcher, because they did issue the announcement, and then obviously that was meant to happen in 21, which then also had to be cancelled. It's now hopefully happening in 22. But actually it will be amazing to see next year whether the announcement from 2020, who the people who were on the lineup for 2020, are they still there in 22? And that's kind of where is it postponed or cancelled altogether really comes in. And that really kind of informs so much in terms of, financial impacts, touring, also people, people may have passed away and can't perform anymore. All these things come into play with all this. And it's really going back to that really core data that is really at risk of being actually kept in any form, even in a physical form, in a program, in a box under a bed. We don't have that leisure anymore. And that is the thing probably I lose my archival sleep over.
But part of the challenge with that is that we're taught early on that if you do anything embarrassing online, it's going to last forever. And so people have this in their mind that the digital is forever. And it's so not, of course. And so there's this, we need to do more, I think, to really highlight the concept of digital obsolescence for the general public. That I can't tell you how often I hear from people who say, I'd love to participate in the project. Can I just send you links to YouTube? And I'm like, no, we need the videos because the YouTube's not going to be around forever. Or, the thing with digital, saving things to an external hard drive, thinking that's going to be their archive, and then taking the external hard drive and putting it in a box and forgetting about it. And then they come back 5 years later and it doesn't power on anymore. That's a real issue. It's so precarious that, and I just the other day was speaking to a theater administrator who was finishing up a 30-year tenure at a theater, and all of their emails from the 1990s with famous artists that they collaborated with, that's all gone. They don't have access to that anymore. That's a whole archive of correspondence that would otherwise, be preserved in an archive. Just gone.
Thank you, Eric. Bernice, you wanted, yes?
There's a meaningful project that I would like to share with you from a friend in Macau. this theater criticism organization, because Macau is a very small city, and also their number of theater performances are also not very frequent for during. But in a manageable amount, I mean, compared to London or like other cities in Europe. So last year, this organization presented an exhibition on cancelled show in Macau, and they collect all these leaflets from those cancelled shows during the pandemic and made up exhibition for this kind of cancelled performances. So I think it makes a very meaningful events for those shows which we may not be able to see during the pandemic. And I learned from a theater museum in Japan. They also start during the start of the pandemic, they start to collect those leaflets from those cancelled performances to add on their archives. So even though the show were cancelled, but still there are some records in the museum that people can trace back for the theater's situation during the pandemic. I think it's something very meaningful for me to share in this discussion.
Thank you, Bernice. Nick, you wanted to say something? Yes.
Yes, again, a big one of the bigger observations that it's something. Well, last night I read Peter Berg's Explosion des Wissens. I think the English title is The History of Knowledge, and he speaks about the history of knowledge from the encyclopedia that Diderot and D'Alembert edited until Wikipedia. So the book came out a couple of years ago, and Wikipedia was still some new platform, which nowadays it's no longer. But I'm fascinated by that idea of thinking about the history of knowledge and also the geographies of knowledge. So where is knowledge located? And in one chapter that he also names geographies of knowledge, he says, that it's all started in the 19th century with small collections, and then we had the national museums, the national libraries, and the more knowledge the world had, the more expertise was needed. Otherwise you cannot really handle the knowledge or the information if you want. So information is expanding, but knowledge not necessarily. So I think he means information if he speaks about knowledge, but I don't want to discuss that here. But it made me thinking of what is the location of knowledge nowadays, and especially now that we had this global pandemic experience altogether. And you guys mentioned global or transnational initiatives on the one hand, and on the other hand, the need for going more local and really work with the community and with local artists whose expertise is needed desperately as well. So I was thinking of what will be the archive of future times. Is it still in a city or in a remote place somewhere in a house, or it's already digital, but will it become something like metaverse, like an archiverse, something like a hybrid form? It's an open observation, and I'm just curious how you think about that question of the locus of knowledge, the space or the geography, the location of knowledge. Where is it?
Thank you, Alan.
Oh my goodness, that's such a big. I don't know. I think from my point of view, I just want to point out as a librarian that a book is a very good source of archival material. You can put a book on a shelf and it's there, and you don't have to do anything to it. I remember at a SIBMAS conference, we had a very good paper, I think, in New York about we should all be really concerned about tape and materials on VHS and everything, and we shouldn't be digitizing books. We should be looking at this material. I mean, I think from the point of view of knowledge, I think it's a question of just our attempt to bring things together from a SIBMAS point of view is to be that kind of bridge to connect people. I just really wanted to kind of talk about a few things that people have brought up. For example, the financial situation of digital performances. I'm fairly sure the Met Opera and the National Theatre in London wouldn't promote digital online if it wasn't actually making them any money. And it's growing, it seems to be growing all the time, and other companies bringing them in. And there is a difference, it must be said, looking at older material and material that, say, the National Theatre and the Met have done, when they've actually created productions that they know are going to be digitally recorded and put out. So there's more of a cinematic approach to the piece. But you will find actors who are very against that, like Sir Ian McKellen wouldn't be involved in anything that would be broadcast because he feels that it takes away from touring. And that's you know, that there are the old school about the live performance. We're always going to come across this idea about the live performance and that special feeling. I do think watching something live happening does give you an element of that liveness about it, but I think actually watching a recording is a totally different feel. From the point of view of a library, as we're all about libraries as well as archives, we've moved, pushed, thrown into digital servicing of students. There are some good things, you know. For years I was saying we should get this, we should get that, or we can't afford this, we can't afford that. And then suddenly when students are in lockdown, everything has gone into blended learning. We were given all this money to get access to these digital resources. And we're promised it's not going backwards. So the students are changing the way that they are dealing with us and working with us and how they study. But I have concerns over the content of some of the platforms that we're paying quite a lot of money for. But that's by the by. That's what's happening on the ground of a library that's trying to service creative people in performing arts. But no, I mean, sure.
Do you mind if I just quickly interrupt, because you were talking about, for example, the National Theatre and the Met? I just had a quick look. Erin from the National Theatre did make a note on, I think, the YouTube chat, where she, kind of says she completely agrees about the need to keep the democratization to access to online performance, particularly as many people are not comfortable coming back to theatre, but that there are issues around keeping up online streaming offer as well as in-person performance. It's the funding and staffing being big ones. So institution needs to consider how they can structure it. So, and I can imagine that even for really large and what we would consider very well-funded organization, that, it is kind of, a challenge kind of financially how to do it, and skills-wise as well, because, there is a different layer to virtual performance. So I just thought I'd interrupt because that comment was on the YouTube chat.
Well, that's very good. Erin from the Horse's Mouth. So that's a very good contribution to this, and it's nice that people are responding to our little chat here. But please, everyone else, chip in about what Nick was saying about knowledge. That would be really good.
If I can piggyback on that too, then just to say, I do think that people are accessing more digitally, of course, but I would there is when it comes to these subscription platforms that you were just talking about, Alan, the university here in Texas, we used to have a full subscription to ProQuest Historical Newspapers, an amazing platform where they've digitized just thousands and thousands and thousands of newspapers and made them searchable. And it was so expensive that that apparently I just went to teach a class on researching theater reviews in digital newspaper databases, and we don't have it anymore. We're down to like 6, like a selection of 6 out of 1,000 newspapers in that database, which is nothing. I mean, that's, you know, comparatively speaking, that's so little, but we couldn't afford it. It's such an expensive thing that, you know, when you ask the question of where does the archive live in the future, my follow-up question to that would be is who owns that archive? And it sort of brings a sort of bigger question about archives, libraries, and the public good. That Richard Ovenden's book on Burning the Book brings up about how, as a society, we're moving away from sort of recognizing the larger value of what a library does, and we need to support it. There's huge costs in things like digitization and storage and preservation. That you have to address that, and it has to come not from the corporations, which then own the rights to it and become gatekeepers for it and then limit access. It has to be part of the public good that makes access available to all. And that is something we have to collectively really work on.
Yeah.
I mean, from my point of view, you know, I get these resources that cost, I won't name them, but we get these resources, and I have to sort of encourage the staff to use them in order for them to go to the students. So it's not a question of just going to the students. You actually have to encourage the staff to actually use these resources too. But a lot of the material is quite old on these platforms. They're pre-digital almost, 2000. And that can be very useful, of course. But a lot of contemporary students want contemporary materials. So that's another issue, where people always want the latest. And it's quite hard sometimes to give them that. But I mean, and also from a point of view, an actor likes having a play in a hand and doesn't like printing off a digital copy. So there's lots of different little issues that float around this idea of digitization. I remember the British Council got rid of all its libraries pretty much all over the place. They still have a few in India and Sri Lanka, I think, in different places. But it was a terrible thing to do, because they thought everything is going digital. Let's save money. Let's get rid of the libraries. But it stopped people interacting with the British Council. In a library, people can walk in and be part of something. But when the library is no longer there, people were not walking in and finding out information from the British Council. So it was hugely short-sighted. But that's by the by, really.
I would like to echo a bit on you guys just talk about the big budget that the theater companies may concern about doing the online performance. Because I also learned an article in Taiwan that they are not talking about having big budgets on doing online performance, but they are changing their artistic or to explore a new form of doing theaters in an immersive way. They're not talking about to engage large number of audience. They're talking about to engage just one audience per show. So it's also some kind of similar performance that I experienced during the pandemic in Hong Kong. There are, at least I have experienced one show in Hong Kong. It's called one man performance. One performers and one audience. And it's a very interesting issue to address about because of the pandemic. It also, of course, we just talk about that makes a big budget for to put those performance online, but still there are some more creates more possibilities for the independent artists to explore a lot, to do theaters in a low budget. There's something that I also think is very interesting and also meaningful to discuss about. And but it creates also another problem for us as a researcher. Is with this kind of performance, they may not have any budgets for promotion. So that's only through some WhatsApp channels or Facebook sharing to make some kind of announcement about this performance, and they may have like a very limited number of audience. So as even though I would like to see it, maybe I may not be able to grasp any information about it. And also another issue is if for this kind of performance in such a private environment, how can you possibly to make a documentation about it? So I'm really quite curious about this kind of new change of independent or small theaters that is going to explore further even after the pandemic.
I think what's encouraging from an educational point of view, the course that we have is contemporary performance practice, and they're teaching the performers to archive their own performances. They're actually taking them and saying, if you're not caring about your work, no one will. A lot. So you have to actually change their mindset and make them value their story and their journey and their creative energy. So I take my hat off to the course, the contemporary performance practice course, because they're putting out artists out there who are going to do it, hopefully. And I think it's with digitization, and you're saying that it's becoming easier for theatre companies, small theatre companies, to archive their work in some form, really. Perhaps not on a professional level, but on a certain level, I think it's easier.
Can I actually jump in on that? Because it's one of the things I've always tried to work very hard. The 10 years working at the V&A, and one of my missions, and I tried to pick up in my paper. It's actually, I'm not sure I agree. Yes, it becomes more affordable to kind of put things onto servers, but what I often found on the ground is literally a bit like a black hole, it's just like there's huge servers, you just expand more, lots of duplication, and it's actually really hard to find, relevant information, like even trying to find often digital photographs, you might find the photographs, but then it's hard to find out who, what was the show, who was the photographer, what were the licensing arrangements, because all of that lives in emails, often with people who may have long departed. So, but one of the things that we really tried to do very early on is really kind of a little bit like an idiot's guide to archives, just to kind of tell people, literally it was like a few pages document, very haphazardly written as a maybe archivist, is kind of, this is records management, try and kind of think about it kind of, in a really structured way. When you're keeping your materials for a specific show, try to do it on a shared server where you put everything in the same structure. So in a weird way, it's kind of the point you made about educating artists to look after their own stuff. It's really kind of giving very basic advice, about how to manage your papers, your documents, that at least archivists going in can make some sense of the material that's there. We never had enough time, and generally we could have done so much more if we had more time. And one of the things I would love to see, especially within kind of the sector how it works in Britain, where a lot of theatre companies do get some form of funding, mostly from the Arts Council, is perhaps Arts Council lead at that, kind of to really encourage companies to take responsibility for the documentation in a virtual way, and perhaps also enable some of the funding to go towards it, so that maybe people can even on a very short-term project, maybe have a professional information manager to just do some of that really holistic work to put a bit of shape on Audubon Digital, and really inform employees and contractors that actually a lot of the materials they create, where they need to be saved, the files are not owned by them, they're owned by the company. Some really basic stuff here, kind of, who, and that goes back to who owns the archive. It is owned at that point at the creator level. So for companies, their contracts, their documentation, whatever. And really kind of starting to educate. And equally, we often run courses for creative people. Course is a bit too official. We often got creative people in on like an hour and a half tour, literally bring them into the stores, trying to physically explain how an archive works, that not everything is an archive. There is appraisal, and generally I kind of tend to go, when you look at it holistically, you have 100%, probably 30 to 40% may actually be of archival value. There's a lot of duplication and research material, whatever. But trying to explain it physically and then kind of really make that message actually, and that now happens in the virtual world, but you need to do some effort in order to kind of get it into that shape. And these really hands-on courses, I think they went a long way. It kind of starts spreading that message, and I'd like to see that, especially now in the post-pandemic, where we're so aware of the digital, the virtual, and the value of it, for that kind of to be taken up at level like the Arts Council, DCMS, but I honestly wouldn't know where to start asking for that support. But that's perhaps something that could happen not just in the UK, but in other countries.
Well, and
Yes,
just to
thank you,
follow up with
Eric.
that too,
Just one word. Yes, we have like 10 or 15 minutes left, so that's my. Yes, it's truly sorry, but we are just, this wonderful conversation must end, unfortunately. But now, Eric, please.
Oh, I wanted to give a shout out to the American Theater Archive Project, which is an organization in the United States that actually has a free manual on their website. It's americantheaterarchiveproject.org. It's a manual designed for theater companies to sort of think about their archives, to sort of explain the process of appraisal, to explain, good sort of basic strategies or how to get started if your theater company has never formally thought about an archive before. It has like sample retention schedules and sort of ideas about like how to work together to sort of make sure everybody in the company is saving things together. The question then is sort of then what do you do with it? And the American Theater Archive Project has always encouraged theater companies to do this first and foremost for themselves. That, when they're applying for grants, when they're, doing a sort of an exhibit about their history or a lobby display, it's important for them to have the archive for themselves. But it also means that they can share it with other people. And so I'm thinking about sort of like digital hubs like DPLA or Europeana or Trove that right now work with institutions like libraries and archives to make materials available to the public in sort of these one-stop search kind of places. But they're not open to independent sort of organizations, and maybe that's something that could be opened up a bit more. One of the big challenges, of course, is metadata and just making sure that sort of it's the content is actually being vetted and to standards. But these platforms exist already, and it seems like the servers exist also to host them. But right now they're sort of being limited to archival and library collections that have a staff of people who are doing the metadata creation and that sort of thing.
Does the Polish Theatre Institute help small theatre companies become archive friendly, or is there a program that you help with Polish theatre?
We have.
Yeah, I could.
No, Mary, please.
Okay, I can say about it because the beginning of the Polish Theatre Institute is a situation that we get the archive from the National Theatre, and that's the beginning. And I think that there's a long, the big work for a lot of people in our department of archivization, which are collecting materials from theaters. And there is a system in which theater companies gives every information about every premiere, about every event taking place. And that's a big archive here in Warsaw in Theatre Institute, but also there are a lot of things which we are doing to put it and digit this materials, and there is a big encyclopedia of Polish theater on the website on the internet where are a lot of information about it, and that's the place which gives many big theater companies and also the small theater companies, for example, also independent, amateur, to give somewhere this information, and another people, researchers, critics, could find this information here in Institute, in our institute. So that's the something like a system which help to collect this information in one place.
Cool. Thank you.
As I said, unfortunately, we will have to end our discussion in a few minutes, but let me just ask one question for you. How bold are your plans on 2022? Because we are going all out and playing, of course, a live SIBMAS conference in Warsaw in spring, but how bold are your plans or plans of your institutions this next year?
I think from my point of view, my own institution is quite cautious. I think we're just seeing through winter, but there is, things change, but I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. We've got people back in theatres, we've got people back in classrooms, we have people back in the library, albeit on a fewer people are allowed. So we're cautiously positive, but I'm very glad that in Warsaw that you're going for it all and having SIBMAS come to the Polish Theatre Institute, which is a beautiful building set in a lovely park for people listening and watching out there who've not been. It's a beautiful place. So we're very glad that you'll be hosting us.
Yeah, we are very happy too. We just cannot wait to see you. 2 years, it's really too long preparing this conference.
The Polish experience for SIBMAS seems to have gone on forever. It seems to have lasted a very long time, but I'm very glad that it's finally going to happen.
Yeah, but it's a very challenging situation. You are just, we have to be very, very prepared after such a long time. But I'm sure that this panel gives us great, wonderful material to prepare this conference, and we are very, very happy to hear from you today and to see you all today, and our online viewers and keynote speakers and panelists. I'm very happy to see you all and to be able to talk to you now. So do we have something more to say? Last words? Yes, Nick?
Hopefully not the last words. I just wanted to add on what you just said and the plans for next year. And I remember when we were wandering through the beautiful park next to the Institute in Warsaw in 2019. It was such a nice, very nice experience to meet there in order to visit the conference venue. And we had already said, well, we look so much forward to the next year, and then we had to wait, and we had to wait, and we had to wait, and we had to postpone, every one of us. And I would just like to thank you at the Polish Institute for Theatre Studies for staying with us, but also for organizing this event today, which is technically extremely demanding, and until now it works perfectly. And we had a few rehearsals beforehand, and it's and discussions how to handle the whole thing. And it's I'd like to thank you just for your patience and for all your efforts that you put in to this event to make this happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was lovely to be here with you and to be able to be part of this. And I'm sure we will be we will be prepared this spring. And I hope that the situation will be beautiful to see you and to get to host you all. Yes. Eric, Maria, Ramona, Bernice.
I just really want to say thank you for facilitating today's event. I have to admit, it's one of my first virtual events, like the last year and a half, were quite challenging. So, I am really looking forward to next year's SIBMAS conference, although I possibly feel like a slight orphan without a collection. But I've heard so much over the years, and I'm really, really looking forward. And today I really, really enjoyed it, and it's great to I think also as we're heading hopefully for the end of this pandemic, we're in a very different place, I think, personally and professionally, that we can look back over the last year and a half and also look forward. I'm not sure whether many of us would have been able to do that 6 months, 12 months ago. We may have missed some opportunities, but I'm not sure we would have been able for it actually to look practically and maybe a little optimistically, and really just assess the situation. So I really appreciate this afternoon session, and really do hope we can pick this up in, it's at the end of May, early June next year, if I'm not mistaken, and perhaps in some future virtual conferences as well. Thank you.
Thank you all. We will see each other in a couple minutes at 5:30 at the Zoom platform for informal meeting Coffee Roulette. And now I would like to end this discussion and this official symposium. Thank you so much. I would like to invite you all to Warsaw Spring 2022 and see you, and do zobaczenia in Warsaw.
Thank you very much.
Is that us back online?